Now let's bring in retired Marine Corps Colonel Mark Cancian. He's a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thanks so much, Mark, for being with us. First of all, your reaction to what we're seeing today.
Well, of course, this is a very solemn moment, and the president has made the point that this will not be the end of the casualties. They will continue, although with Iranian drones and missile attacks going down, we hope that there won't be very many in the future. I would note something that came up earlier, this movie Taking Chance. That was based on a real event. The Chance was Chance Phelps. He was a Marine who was killed in Iraq. And it's the story of his return to his family and the casualty assistance officer who was portrayed by Kevin Bacon, who in real life was a colonel named Mike Strobel. So it was a very powerful story in the Marine Corps, and then, of course, turned into a movie.
Mark, I want to go back to something that James was talking about a moment ago, the circumstances surrounding why these Army reservists were actually in Kuwait. Tell us a little bit about that. We heard from James that there was intelligence, apparently, that allowed Iran to know where these American soldiers were. Why were these reservists in Kuwait in the first place?
The interesting thing about the Army is that most of its logistics is in the reserve component. The Army Reserve is entirely reserve logisticians. They do trucks, they do communications, engineering, supply. The Army can't really operate without its reserve component, even for relatively low-level operations. And what we're seeing in the Gulf now, has required these reservists to be on duty. And the Army did this deliberately. They moved a lot of the active duty troops into combat forces. They did this back in the 1970s, and then put the logistics support into the reserves, one effect of which was that for the United States to go to war, for the Army to go to war, they had to call up a lot of reservists. So you're going to see reservists all over the theater, even though you haven't seen reference to a mobilization.
James, let me turn back to you. And you mentioned the Tactical Operations Center where these reservists were operating out of, but you also described it as sort of a trailer. Was this a hardened trailer? Was there protection? And if so, what kind of protection would have been present there for that center?
Sure. So the Tactical Operations Center that we're talking about is really indicative of the type of Tactical Operations Center we saw throughout the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. They are typically made out of either triple wide trailers, some are smaller, or almost shipping containers. And the threat in Iraq and Afghanistan was really, improvised explosive devices. It was mortars, it was artillery, things of that nature. Even improvised explosive devices attached to, individuals or vehicles. That was the main threat. And so this Tactical Operations Center was really built for that. It was the trailer, these trailers surrounded by 6-foot T-walls. T-walls are steel reinforced concrete barriers that were surrounding it. But there is no protection from the air, which is how Iranian Shia 136 drones operate. Is the T-walls are essentially ineffective regarding an aerial attack from drones. So that's sort of the extent of the fortification that was at this Tactical Operations Center.
And let me ask you as well, James, President Trump, who has called for Iran's, quote, unconditional surrender, said today that Iran will be hit very hard. What has he said about the potential of additional lives lost?
He has not held back in terms of his bluntness that the American people could see more casualties. That statement, it sort of depends on who you ask. Some people appreciate his forthcomingness on that because the American people should know that when a nation decides to go to war and put troops into harm's way, that a result of that could be casualties. So some actually appreciate that bluntness. Others feel that the commander in chief is not only is the commander in chief head of the armed forces, but they need to be the comforter in chief and the comforter in chief as well. And so some people could criticize that the president could take a more softer tone in the sense of like look, we're doing everything we can to prevent casualties. So it really depends on who you ask in terms of his bluntness, but he's not wrong. I mean, when service members take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And in addition to that, they agree to obey the lawful orders of the president and the officers appointed over them. And the subtext to all that is service members are signing a check to potentially give their life for their country. And so it's important that the American people don't lose sight of that, regardless of, where politics may fall. That's the agreement that an American joining the military makes with the country that they're serving and protecting the Constitution.
Mark, a moment ago, you talked about the role of reservists, but as this conflict continues, how should we think about that? There are many people throughout this country who serve as reservists, and obviously this is the unimaginably horrific result that no family wants to think about. Give us a sense of what the role of reservists will be here as this conflict continues.
Well, I think there are already a lot of service involved in the operation. A reservist, Air Force, for example, many of their tankers, many of their cargo aircraft are flown by reservists. These are pilots who often fly for the airlines during the week and then will fly for the Air Force on weekends or when they have time available. We have Army logisticians. We could have more as the war goes on and the need for logistics and sustainment increases. I don't expect a large reserve mobilization. Now, if we were ever have troops, boots on the ground, which right now we're not moving towards, but if we were, then that would require a lot of reservists. And I would note that the Army, as I mentioned before, was structured this way intentionally. The story, likely true, is that General Abrams, who was Chief of Staff of the Army and made a deal with Secretary Schlesinger that they would move a lot of the active Army into the combat forces and backfill with reservists. He said he wanted to make sure that the Army could not go to war without the reserves and bringing in all the hometowns of America.
And you see on your screens there the 6 killed in action. Speaking of the hometowns of America, they were based out of Iowa, but as you can see there, they came from all across this country. And I want to ask you in particular, Mark, because you actually previously played a role in notifying the families of fallen soldiers. Tell us about your part. How does that process work?
Well, as we heard, the military moves to notify families very quickly. They want to make sure that families hear from the government first, that they don't just get a phone call from a comrade in theater. When a casualty occurs in theater, they shut down the internet so that people can't send messages back. The local, whatever military post is closest to the family is notified, and they send an officer out to notify the family. I did that on 2 occasions. I went with the chaplain, and it is an extremely difficult task. There's no way you can face a young woman, a wife, tell her that she's not a widow.